Those are a couple of pretty heavy films. I hope you are able to take them in and enjoy them. Hope it also sparks some questions for you. At this time, we're going to just get into the discussion about the subject matter of these films and of the shadow report that brings us all here today. So to kick us off, I want to introduce our wonderful panel. First, we have Robert Philip Holbrook. He's the executive director of Abolitionist Law Center, located in Pennsylvania. Next is Patricia Vickers. She's an organizer with the Human Rights Coalition and the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration in Pennsylvania. Next, we have Kelly Savage Rodriguez of Drop LWOP and California Coalition of Women Prisoners. We have Stanley Jamel Bellamy, an organizer with Release Aging People in Prison, or RAP, located in New York. And lastly, we have Anthony Hingle Jr., an ambassador with the Visiting Room Project, located in Louisiana. So welcome to these panels. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to answer the same few questions, and then we'll give the audience the opportunity to ask the panel questions at the end of this, okay? So my first question for the panel is, can you share with us how you came to this work of challenging the US's racist and cruel practice of death by incarceration? And can you also talk about what your advocacy looks like in your state? Let's start with Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for being here. As she said, I'm Kelly Savage Rodriguez. I was sentenced in California. I did 23 years on life without the possibility of parole, and was absolutely blessed to have the advocacy of the California Coalition for Women Prisoners be involved in my experience most of my incarceration. So they taught me how to advocate, why it was important to stand up for ourselves and figure out what our existence looked like right where we were. And with that, we started pushing the narrative about us being invisible and why we needed to do something different. And it started with a storytelling project that turned into a visual aid opportunity with graphics graphics both from incarcerated people and artists on the outside, and a video telling story of what it looked like to serve the sentence. Not realizing that campaign and that drive would lead to something like the Drop LWOP Coalition. We were just trying to make sure that people considered more than just individuals serving a death sentence or individuals serving life in California, because no one was talking or understood what was happening with people serving LWOP. And so in doing that, it created not only a lot of hope and encouragement, but it also gave people an opportunity to be heard in ways that even in the court system they hadn't. And it allowed people to stand up and be noticed for the first time. So it was an absolute blessing to be able to do that, not realizing that it would not only affect myself, but so many others in the institution and across the state. And it gave people, not only incarcerated people, but families, hope as well. That's part of the hardest part of our sentence, is the effects it has on our families. So it really motivated a lot of families. It even got a lot of families more involved with the incarcerated population than they were in the past, because they finally started to see that there was options. And so I was extremely blessed to be able to do that.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Well, that's good morning. As she said, my name is Stanley Jamel Bellamy. I'm an organizer with releasing aging people in prison. I'm also part of the People's Campaign for Parole Justice, and I'm part of what we call the Clemency Collective. Nikki asked the question, what brought me to this action? I was incarcerated. I was transferred from Attica State Prison to Greenhaven State Prison in 1989. And when I arrived in Greenhaven, there was older gentlemen, Eddie Ellis, these are stewards who we call giants in the new prison movement. And they asked a basic question. And that question was, how is it that blacks and Latinos together only make up less than 25% of the general population, state population, but at the same time make up 85% of the prison population? And 75% of that number is coming from New York City. And they looked at it, it wasn't just coming from New York City, it was coming from 7 specific neighborhoods and 18 assembly districts. And so when they asked that question, we said, hold up, how is it? We make up less than 25% of the state population, but make up 85% of the prison population. So that what brought me to this action, trying to answer that question. And so we created what we call the non-traditional approach to criminal and social justice. And when you look at this report that we put together, later on, years later, you will see that Michelle Alexander in her book, The New Jim Crow, basically parroted everything we was talking about in the 90s. But she popularized it, she put it out. When we was talking about it, we incarcerated individuals and they looking at us like, y'all don't know what you're talking about. So they commissioned studies to find out that yes, we did know what we was talking about. The prisoner, when you talk about the school to prison pipeline, they recognized that when they did their report, it's called a report, it's called Unhealthy Choices. And they recognized that somewhere like 10 schools in New York City produced over 75% of the prison population. So it was a connection from the schools that we was going to the prison. So that, and this was, we talked about this in the 90s. So this is what brought me to this action. When I got to Greenhaven, I began to learn about this. I said, oh my God, I need to get involved in this. Because I was serving a 62.5 years to life sentence. He wasn't even looking at the sentence at the particular time. He was looking at the whole dynamics of how our neighborhoods was being criminalized. They did a report, another newspaper article, which you probably heard it called $1 Million Blocks. Have any of y'all heard of that $1 Million Block report? Well, it talks about, and they used East New York, and it talks about this block. It cost $30,000 to incarcerate one individual at the time when they did this report. So they saying this is $1 million block. That means they got at least 33 people off that block that's incarcerated that they paying $30,000 a year to incarcerate. And this was all over the state, city of New York. You had $1 million blocks where it was incarcerating Black and Latino youth. So when I came to this action, that's what we came to address. And while I was incarcerated, I wrote bills, took part in writing bills, took part in advocating for life without parole, even for, the type of sentences I had. And then in 2018, one of my comrades, Jose Saladano, went home. And he joined RAP. And he became the director of RAP. And what he did, since we was working so much in the institution, the prison system, he reached back into the prison system and recruited me to become their voice on the inside and make the recruitment. And so that's what I did on the inside. I became their recruiter to get people, family members involved in this advocacy because it was important that we understand that we needed to play a role inside, and outside in changing the system. So with this, it's one other thing I want to mention before I pass this mic. Coming home, but what RAP is doing right now in New York City is that we're sponsoring 2 bills. One is called the 55 and older bill that says that anybody 55 and older who has been in prison for 15 years should be given the opportunity to go to their immediate parole board. Because many of these men that we're talking about that are fit, and women, and when you hear me say men, please don't think I'm excluding the women. It's just that I've been in a maximum security prison with men for so long that I always say men, but I also include the women. that anybody 55 and over. We know that most of these people that's 55 and older came to prison in their late teens and early 20s, and now they're 55 years. So they've been in prison more than 15 years. I came to prison when I was 23, sentenced when I was 24, and did 37 and a half years. So we said anybody 55, we don't care what type of sentence you have, 55 and older, been in prison 15 years or more, we believe you should get the opportunity to go to the parole board. The other bill we sponsor is the phantom parole bill. We saying that, again, we're not saying that anybody should be released, we're saying give them an opportunity. But the phantom parole bill says that when somebody goes to the board, judge them on the merit of the person they are today as opposed to who they were 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Because we recognize that no matter what, the crime will never change, but the individual can change. So that's what the bill's responsible, and that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Anthony, so I know that in the film earlier, you know Sammy that was in the film. Can you tell us about what your advocacy looks like and like how you got started?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Hingle Jr. from New Orleans, Louisiana, ambassador with the Visiting Room Project. I came into this advocacy work from being directly impacted from serving a DBI sentence, which is labeled mandatory life sentence in Louisiana. I was released after serving 32 years. While I was incarcerated, being part of incarcerated clubs, we were drafting bills that we was trying to turn into laws where we would be afforded opportunity for parole or pardon review. Because when I arrived at Angola in 1990, it wasn't but like one person going home every other year. You know, so with that being said, it had turned into like a warehouse of elderly people. I mean, you went from having a hospital that had 2 wards to makeshifting units that had turned into nursing homes where you was housing like 86 men to 1 dormitory. So it's maybe 4 domes that's medical domes in this camp, 4 domes that's medical domes in this camp, and so on. But while incarcerated, you want to do exalt every avenue that you possibly can to try to make a way to come home. So I was fortunate enough to come home after Louisiana had and worked to getting a new governor in office.
Is it that or?
Well, we was able to get a new governor in office that was pretty much leaning towards trying to let a few people come home. I can't say for whether or not it was because he actually felt like, well, a person had been dead over 20 years and he had been changed and bettered himself and we were productive in society, or whether or not he was just trying to get Louisiana from being #1 in mass incarceration. So what he did, he actually sent home maybe 1,500 people that had like small sentences. And that created a conflict because you had private jails, city jails, that was ran by people that was like, if the governor gonna be sending the good people home, then who's gonna wash our cars? You know, as inmates, as incarcerated people. But when I came home, I joined an organization called Vote Varsity Experience. And the way we advocate for those that we left behind is we also go to the legislation every session with bills trying to create avenues for not one person to come home, but for hundreds and hundreds of people to come home. So like I said, with this governor in office and with Vote getting maybe a few judges in Louisiana in office, a lot of people have started coming home now. But that window is closed because just, 2-3 days ago, a new governor just took office. So now all those people that are incarcerated, it's like their hopes have just disappeared already. You know, to the point where a lot of them just started buying tombstone and burial plots outside of the prison that don't want to be buried in prison. So that's what it looked like for me as far as the advocacy.
Thank you. Mama Pat, I know you worked with Miss Dee was in the film in Cadby in Pennsylvania. Can you tell us about how you came to the work and what your advocacy looks like?
Okay. I came into this work in 2001, but it started when my son was arrested and sentenced to life in prison in 1988. Now I didn't realize then that life in prison or life without parole meant that my 17-year-old son would die in prison. And at that time, when he received his sentence and received that life without parole sentence, it just triggered something in me, and I felt a lot of guilt trying to figure out where I went wrong, that my son would end up having life in prison, what I could have done better, what I shouldn't have done. You just go through this whole self-evaluation. And one thing I did tell myself was that even though I couldn't protect him on the outside, I was going to do everything in my power to protect him on the inside. So whatever he needed, whatever I could do, that's what I was going to do. In 2001, he wrote me a letter and said he wanted me to be a part of this organization called the Human Rights Coalition, an organization that him and other men in prison, Russell Maroon Schultz, Celine, and my son co-founded this organization inside, and that's how I got started. The unique thing about this organization, the Human Rights Coalition, is that it was the men inside organized inside, and we, the family members, organized on the outside. The unique thing about the Human Rights Coalition was that our advisory board was our loved ones on the inside. They advised us on what to do out here. And because the love that we had for our loved ones inside, we did everything that we needed to do. I had no idea on how to organize. I'd never been to a courtroom other than with my son. I didn't know anything about the laws. I didn't know how to hold a town hall meeting. I didn't know how to do any of those things, but our advisory council from the inside said, Mama Pat, do this. Mama Pat, go here. Mama Pat, talk to this person. And that's what we did. The other unique thing about the way we were organizing was that it was all family members. It was all mothers and sisters and sons and daughters of people who are in prison. And we developed a kinship, like a family. And we were able to, at that time it was like, you heard the person on the video saying that they're ministers to society. It was just, they deserve to be in prison and everybody should be locked up. At that time I had no one to turn to talk to. I had nobody to support me when things were going wrong with my son. I mean, when he was in solitary confinement, I was in solitary confinement. When he didn't call, I thought the worst. But with this new kinship and this Human Rights Coalition, the family that we developed through this organization, we were able to brag about our children. We were able to talk about them. We were able to talk about their accomplishments. We were able to be ourselves and not be judged. So that was a strong tool, a strong avenue of organizing. Another thing that we did we found out was that the prison system didn't like you to make public the things that they were doing. So we supported each other, And when someone was abused in prison, someone was thrown in solitary confinement, someone was beaten, some men were on a hunger strike because they couldn't stand the conditions of solitary confinement. They made a statement by going on a hunger strike. When they did that, we called the prison and we demanded that they be released. I would have never thought of doing that on my own, but with my family and my kin folks, you know, we all got there, say this, say that, demand it, don't just ask them, demand it. And we did it together and we called the prison, and that became a routine. We would call and they thought that we were a larger organization than we were because we had so many, had so many people calling. So that made a big difference. And when we saw that, we said, aha, they don't like, for us to know what they're doing on the outside, on the inside. And we also started a newsletter, which turned into a magazine. And through this newsletter, it reached just about a person in every prison in Pennsylvania. We even had these newsletters going to California. We had the newsletter going to Texas. We had the newsletter going to Florida. That newsletter that we developed kind of changed, our attempt was to change the narrative of how people were seeing our loved ones in prison. And that newsletter allowed the people inside to write articles, portray their artwork, their poets. A lot of the articles in the beginning was written by our loved ones who were my son had grown from a little 17-year-old to a man, and he became very articulate, and he was writing articles, and Celine was writing articles, and it was just amazing how intelligent and the humanity that was coming out of the prison on paper, and people got to read this. It was amazing about their artwork and the poems, and people could see this. We even had photographs whenever we could have photographs about the people in prison, just to show the people on the outside that this is what people really like, because the image that they had of people in prison on the inside, the image was just like in Pennsylvania, it was they the worst of worst, Let me just hold my hand back close because, who knows what they're gonna do. So to change the image, I like to think that this movement, this magazine, changed the image, planted a seed to show people that these are human beings inside. These are not animals, these are not monsters. The other thing our magazine did was show the people on the inside what was happening on their behalf outside. So when we sent newsletters on the inside, we also included articles about what we were doing out here, what rallies we were doing, what bills were being made, what town halls we had, newspaper articles, op-eds, and they gained a lot of hope seeing this. Oh, this is what they're doing for us, and we showed pictures. This is what they're doing for us, and then that gave them encouragement to do better, to write more, to organize more, and we really grew. We grew from a very small organization to so many prisoners writing letters and calling for help, and we helped by, calling the prison and making a big stink about everything that they did. That was another instrument that we could use to threaten the prisoners, because we started calling them threatening. If you don't let this person out of solitary confinement, we're going to have the newspaper, notify the newspaper. When we had our law firm, Abolitionist Law Center, we said we're going to have our lawyers call you. So those were the tools that we used. And I would think that, just having loved ones. The other thing we did was, I like to think that we're responsible for, I'm going to take the credit for it, was that we were the inspiration for Abolitionist Law Center. Because Brett Roach came from the Human Rights Coalition, went to law school, opened up the Abolitionist Law Center, and reached back and started helping all of the people that we were talking to in prison that had issues and who were in solitary confinement. So we were inspiration for that. We were inspiration for a coalition to abolish death by incarceration. Because I'm gonna be honest, when we first started the Human Rights Coalition, I had no hope, no idea that my son was ever coming home. But as we kept growing and growing and growing, we started to think, well, maybe we can do this. And then we started meeting to start the coalition to abolish death by incarceration, which is made of mostly people who have loved ones in prison. So I think we were responsible for that, take credit for it. So that's been my journey from not knowing anything to knowing a lot, from afraid to speak in public, to being able to speak in public, and for inspiring people to grow and create their own organizations that would help our loved ones in prison.
Well, I gotta follow Mama Pat. Well, first, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Salim Holbrook. I'm the Executive Director of the Abolitionist Law Center, co-founder of the Human Rights Coalition, Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration. What brought me to this work was I was arrested at the age of 16 for my involvement in a drug-related murder. I was facing a death sentence. I was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. I served 27 years in prison, 10 years in solitary confinement. What brought me here today, Mama Pat so eloquently talked about it, was I was part of an ecosystem, or part of building an ecosystem from within the prison system, that as a 16-year-old skinny kid that went into the penitentiary, we quickly had to grow up quick. And much of my early years was spent just acting out, resisting the prison system, because I knew something I instinctively knew this was wrong, what was happening. I instinctively knew that this system was wrong, that could try and sentence a child to death, right? Not succeed at that, and then say, well, we're gonna sentence you to spend the rest of your life in parole, and then go upstate and then see, wow, I'm not the exception. There's hundreds of other people up here like me, but then there's thousands of other people who are sentenced to life without parole within the prison system. And just seeing how disposable we were made me rebel. But in rebelling, I wasn't rebelling with a purpose. It wasn't until one of my journeys into the hole, where I spent close to 3 years straight in the hole, I met political prisoners. And that completely blew my mind, because for me, I thought that political prisoners were from like the 60s, and that, to me, that was like 100 years ago in the 90s, right? The way, for me to meet someone that was a member of the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, I was like, wasn't that 50 years ago? And it was like, no. And then, they encouraged me to read, they inspired me to read. And it really turned my perspective, it really flipped me right side up, right? Because I was someone saying, like, I'm a rider from my neighborhood, but all of us were in prison for destroying our neighborhoods. And so to meet someone like a Russell Maroon Schultz, a Joseph Jojo Bowens, a Fred Muhammad Burton, who was in prison for defending our neighborhoods, right? Who were in prison for holding police officers that murdered Black people, Black children with impunity in Philadelphia in the 60s and 70s, for retaliating against them because the system couldn't hold them accountable. For me to meet them, have conversations with them, their militancy was what was needed to get through to me and other youth. But then when they started saying, well, hey, did you know that we fed people? Did you know that we secured the community so that seniors could walk around the communities at night and no one would do nothing to them? Did you know that we had health centers? Did you know that we stepped to slumlords and made them fix up the apartments? Like, that blew my mind, because that was a complete alternative government that they were creating in our communities. And I remember coming up, my mother was like a strong anti-apartheid activist in the house. So it really started connecting me. Like my father, I grew up with the picture of Huey Newton sitting on the wicker chair with the shotgun in one hand and the spear in the other. And again, that looked so far away, but it was actually in my household, but I gravitated so far to the streets, to the drug game, that I got separated from it. So it was when I came to prison, that's where I learned about political struggles. That's where I learned about abolition. And in the whole, in solitary confinement, Mama Pat shared about how we started the Human Rights Coalition. We were being so crushed and oppressed in Pennsylvania, and it was decimated because it was the rise of mass incarceration in the 90s, and there was no voices in the communities for us. And we were being dogged out in solitary confinement, spending years in the hole. I was in a special management unit, which was not just a hole, but it was the hole within the hole. Russell Marone Schultz had already been in the hole for 20 years straight. We realized that we needed someone to speak for us, but the system wasn't going to do it. And there wasn't, the nonprofit industry certainly wasn't going to do it, right? So it was a really defining moment for us when we got together and said, yo, we're comrades, but prison isn't an environment where you invite your family to another person's family. You don't really connect your family, particularly in men's prison. That's something that you hold tight because you don't want that to be used against you if anything ever went south. But we were able to build up enough trust with ourselves that we was like, yo, how about my mom meet your mom? How about my father meet your father? My sister meet your sister? So that kinship, we did that from the bowels of solitary confinement. In two of the worst prisons, the break-in prisons in Pennsylvania. And Mama Pat talked about how we bottled the prison so much that they thought that we were like huge. When you go to prison, 16 years old, 124 pounds, adult prison, you gotta learn to punch above your weight. And that's what many of us knew how to do, was punch above our weight. And we were very explicit that our policies, our politics were gonna be adversarial. We weren't both siding the prison system, right? And that was a problem within a lot of the nonprofits that were out there on the streets, in that when we would say, hey, they stripped us out and had us 10 days in a cell completely naked and weren't feeding us, they would say, okay, well, what happened? What's the other side? And we was like, you know what? We're gonna have our families advocate for us because this is an adversarial relationship here. And our families were the ones that when that happened to us, they didn't call up there and say, why did you do that? They called up there and said, you better get them out of the hole. You better do this. And the prison wasn't used to dealing with that. And so we really disarmed them, and we put them on the defensive, and we still have them on the defensive. Mama Pat talked about the inspiration for the Abolitionist Law Center. That inspiration came from from solitary confinement. We realized that we needed advocates, but we realized we needed attorneys, right? All of us knew the law, right? I had to learn the law. I remember 18 years old in solitary confinement, the first book I read was Black Law Dictionary, right? Because this system was oppressing me with the law. So I had to learn the law as a means of defending myself, not because I believe in the law. And to this day, when attorneys come on board at the Abolitionist Law Center, part of your orientation is there ain't nothing sacred about American law. It's a tool. It's a tool that we use to defend our communities, to defend ourselves. I could give two shits about it. Seriously, it has enough worth to me as toilet paper, right? But we have to use it to liberate our people and to help our people. And so that's the Abolitionist Law Center emerged. Brett Grody, me and Brett met when I was in solitary confinement at SCI Green. We talked about building a legal arm. We didn't have the name, but we knew we were going to build a legal arm. We actually didn't think it was going to be attorneys at first. We thought it was going to be paralegals. We didn't think law schools would be crazy enough to accept any of us, or any of us would make it through law schools, right? Because the urgency, we were trying to go now. But that was part of the project. Even now, we have a C4, which is involved in legislation, which is involved in elections. Again, I don't believe abolition is going to come to the United States through litigation, legislation, or elections. That's going to come through the people. That's going to come through sustained upheaval. But as long as this system, as long as the legislative branch, as long as the elected branch, as long as the legal branch can oppress and harm our people, that is an area, that is a space that we are going to contest in. That is a space where we are going to make sure that our voices are heard and we can push back. So all of this certainly emerged from the prison system. It's an ecosystem in Pennsylvania that we built from within the prison system, but it couldn't have been possible without people like Mother Pat, without my late mother, who was also a co-founder of the Human Rights Coalition, without people like Ms. Didi, without people like my sister who came here to Geneva in 2009 when I was serving life without parole as a juvenile, to advocate in front of the UN to abolish life without parole sentences for children. We succeeded in that to an extent, although the United States still does it. There was a window where myself and hundreds of other people, including Mama Pat's son, were able to escape out, slide out, because that's what Russell Maroon said. He said, man, this is a legalized jailbreak. Y'all better get out while you can, because this door is going to close. So that's what brings me to the work. And then the work we do today, again, we challenge the carceral state from the front end to the back, and I think that's the best way I could say it. Solitary confinement, extreme sentencing, police brutality, legislation, you name it. If it's dealing with the carceral state, we probably do too much, right? But I think everyone who's involved in this work understands that we can never do enough, right? So that's just some of the work I do and what brought me here.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. I think that we've all talked about how incredible it has been that we are here in Geneva talking about death by incarceration. So I want to ask, why is it important to refer to sentences that exceed life expectancy as a DBI, or death by incarceration? And can you also talk about how the movement to abolish the death penalty in the US relates to the movement to end death by incarceration? And I want to start with Janelle.
We're going to start with Well, to me, it's important because what it is I had a 62 and a half to life sentence. Even though it wasn't life without parole, my sentence, and this is one thing we did in New York, we didn't separate it. We did, you had guys with life without parole, and then you had lifers. We recognized that we was all one, especially the ones of us that had those virtual life sentences. I had 62 and a half years to life. I came to prison when I was 23 years old. That meant I was going to go to the board in 2048 as an 85-year-old man. The possibility of living that long in the New York State prison system was non-existent. And then because of my lifestyle, the health conditions, it was no way I was going to live to 85. And so it was important for me to recognize that I was serving a death sentence. Although I didn't have life without parole, I had an opportunity to go to the parole board. That's 2048. Where are we at right now? 2023. If it wasn't for the governor, and no, I don't even want to say the governor, because I say this, the governor let me out. It was RAP, Cooney School of Law, all my support that got me out. Because they made sure my name stayed in. Anytime somebody went home, they always said, get him out. Because a lot of the men that left the penitentiary, left me behind, was men I trained, that went through my programs, that went through a lot of the stuff that I developed over the years while I was incarcerated. So when they went home, they got in positions of power. They got in positions, they're executive directors, they directors, they vice presidents, they all these type of things. So when it came an opportunity to get me out, and they, wrote support letters for me and everything, they put their titles. They said that, they're not only my friends, this is what we are doing. This is what we served time with them. We had those type of sentences. So you gave us the opportunity, give him the opportunity, and they gave it to me. So when we look at, in connection to, identifying those sentences, we must identify them as death sentences because, like I said, in New York, the average age mortality rate in New York prisons is 57 years old and to 58 years old. You live past that, you survived, you made a chance, you're lucky. I came home at 60. I went in at 23, came home at 60. So I'm a survivor, but I had a death sentence. Well, and on the international level, we have to look at this, it ain't just the United States. We look at the United States, what the United States is doing to our communities. And I didn't say this yesterday, and I should have said this. The United States needs to be ashamed. You know, they should be ashamed of themselves. Because we're the only state that country that talks about disposable people. We're disposable. Those of us that they put incarcerated with life without parole and these virtual life sentences, they're saying we're disposable. You know, and I say that's a waste of human capacity. And so on an international level, we must pressure the United States and get the United States to understand that people change. There's no such thing as disposable people. You know, we are human beings, and that's why I don't use the term inmate, none of that. Sometimes I used to use the term prisoner, but no, we are, excuse my language, fucking people.
Exactly.
We're human beings, and we need to be recognized as human beings, that we have rights. Forget that, we have rights. And one of them is not to be tortured, because that is a torture sentence. To understand me doing 37 and a half years, y'all don't even understand the traumatic experience and dynamics of me coming home after 37 years. And when I tell people I came home, and I'm gonna pass this mic in a minute, because I know we're working with time, I tell people I turned down a $52,000 a year job that required me to sit inside of a room or office all day, and they couldn't understand why I turned that down. I was locked in a cage for 37 and a half years. I did not want to be in an office space where I didn't have no movement and mobility. So that's why I turned that job down, because that was not something I wanted to do. What I wanted to do, I left too many people back there. And for me to come home and start working in these jobs and forget about all those brothers that I left back there and sisters I left back there that actually helped in my transformation, no, I couldn't do it. So I turned down them jobs and I worked with rap. And that gave me the mobility to do it, and that's why I'm sitting here today. And I would like to pass the mic to whoever you want.
Kelly?
For me, I think it's really important because in California, it is very normal for them to change their idea of who should be incarcerated. We don't have the opportunity to have the judge listen to the case and make a decision. The prosecutor decides who gets life without. But we have people who are doing 210 years because they were under 18, so we don't want to give them a LWOP sentence or a death sentence because that could be overturned. So let's just give them extreme amounts of sentences instead. I have a 17-year-old roommate who was in a college class. They know she physically was in the class taking a test, they proved it, and they don't care. 210 years. It makes no effing sense. And that is normal every day. There's 8 people in a cell in the institution that I was in, and I had 7 people in the room with me at any given time because, of course, they incarcerate anyone and everyone, and none of them weren't lifers. Every single one was a lifer or serving an LWOP sentence. And when we started talking about the space, and what it would look like, people with LWOP were like, what do I say? Because I don't know if I can cap my years off at 30, even though that's when the board lets you, have an opportunity. And it was kind of a slap in the face because we found out shortly thereafter it was a lie. We thought that after 30 years you went to board because the policy says so, and it doesn't exist. It is just the facade that they have for the community to believe there is a written process. And so when we're looking at that, we're understanding that everyone we're dealing with around us is all doing the same time. And we have to consider it what it is and understand that whether it was 25 years or it was 90 years, they weren't going anywhere. We knew a lot of it had to do with our governor at the time, and it was extremely difficult to have any mobility. And when it did start to change, we realized that the hope was there, but then the rehabilitation wasn't, because of course they don't provide what you need to get the healing that they require for you to get out, to prove yourself. And so we had to start creating that type of environment as well, that healing environment, and realizing that even then They were denying people access because of their time now. You could facilitate the groups, but because you had a long time, you couldn't participate in the group. And so it was one more punishment after another, and we realized that every single person had to be considered for it being, we're never getting out unless we all fight together and work together to make it happen. And both men and women, across the state were all starting to look at what it looks like to do life and how to change it, and realizing we're all doing a death sentence if we don't change it with each other.
Thank you so much. I don't have time for questions, so I'm going to ask one more question for the panel. My last question is about pathways to freedom for people living with DBI sentences. So in our joint shadow report, we discussed the importance of clemency and parole. What do these processes look like in your state? And in your perspective, what needs to be done to ensure that these systems meet international human rights standards? Start with Anthony.
I can remember a situation where the case that was mentioned on the film, on the Philadelphia film, Pennsylvania film, where the guy had mentioned the Montgomery case that was dealing with the juveniles. The guy, Henry Montgomery, was actually in Angola with me. When they passed that bill for them to go in front of the parole board, he had been served maybe 53 or 55 years. So when they finally brought him on the board, they still found a way to deny him. After 53, 55 years. I think he went on the board again and may have got denied a second time and made it the third time. But even after all of those years, being sentenced to life, mandatory life as a juvenile, you find some kind of way to deny him. You know? And let me mention this here right quick. There's another juvenile recipient that's in here with us, Terrence Wynn. He was also in Angola with us and was fortunate enough to make parole after the second time, because I believe he was also denied the first time around as a juvenile. But these DBI sentences is creating mass incarceration around the country, not just in Louisiana. And it's a death sentence. I mean, sometimes we're labeled as the walking dead. You actually have a death sentence. It's just a slow death. But while you serving that death sentence, that slow death, they're gonna benefit from it because they're gonna slave you for decades. I mean, you're in Louisiana, Angola sits on a former plantation. And we're doing the same work that our ancestors was doing decades ago. So you're gonna slave 30, 40, 50 years until you practically break your back, and now you're in a hospital ward, in a hospital bed, wearing a diaper where you can't even take care of your own personal hygiene. And you're placed into a room where you're dying by yourself. I'm kind of lost right now. But these DBI sentences, they was created from tough on crime platforms and also to keep the slave trade going. You know, it's geared towards blacks, the minorities. I mean, Louisiana is 75% of blacks that are serving the DBI sentences. When it's only 33% of blacks that make up Louisiana. You know, leave it at that.
For California, they have the commutation process. We went through a very short period with Governor Brown, who helped create the problem back in the day, and now decided that he would re-look at some of these cases, and I happen to be blessed. We have Susan Bustamante in the room as well, who is also blessed to be released from the sentence. But in that process, there is a lot of case law that's happening that's allowing people the opportunity to parole as well. using, the juvenile life bills that have benefited as well. It's just extremely difficult because it depends on the governor and what they want. Ours happen to be looking towards presidential aspirations, so he's a lot more difficult to deal with, vetoes any bills that talk about reform or support, but at the same time, it's each of us doing the work of trying to help and support each other and give each other that opportunity. We have people who are writing commutations and court work for people because they don't know how, or they're in our hospice care facility and can't write it for themselves. Individuals that can't assist, we do the work for them, because the reality is we know that they deserve the opportunity to seek relief, and the system is going to deny us at every opportunity. So we're extremely blessed to have the opportunity to have a lot of people paroled. We have 100 people in California that were released, and this is not just that they were released, these are all the ways each one of them are giving back to their community in that short, about 5-year period that we've had releases. And we were just trying to look at what it looks like to give back to our communities, because the reality is, as you guys heard up here, we're told we're the worst of the worst. We heard it on the video as well. That's the way they incarcerate us. But the reality is we're the ones giving back to our community, both inside and when we get out. And when we do that, we know we're helping heal the community, both inside and out. And we know that's what it takes.
In New York, the process is the governor has the sole power to grant clemency and pardons. Whoever's the governor. Right now we have a female governor. She doesn't have to go to the legislatures. If she want to give anybody, she can give as many clemency and pardons as she wants. They can't stop it. It is in the New York State Constitution that she has the sole power. So the power to grant clemency in New York rests with the governor. As for the parole board, that's why we're sponsoring the Fair and Timely Parole Board. Because prior to Como coming into office and Kathy Hochul, we had some governors that wasn't about parole. So we came up with coined the term in New York, the deuce crew, meaning that people was going to the board and getting hit with 24 months, because that's the max they can give you in New York. 2 years. You get hit with 2 years. 2 years. I had a friend that went to the board. He only had 15. He had a 15-year to life sentence. They made him do 33 years off of that 15 life sentence. And then this is what makes it even worse for him. They let him go home in 2007. He finally got exonerated in 2019 that he didn't commit the crime. And they made him do 33 years for a crime they knew he did not commit. And they kept him in jail for all that long. And it's a bunch of people that they do that to. So that's why we know that if we don't enshrine it in law, that when people go to the board and they need to have a fair and timely parole, that the next governor can come in and the whole system will change again, and that deuce crew thing will start right back up again. Right now, there's several mechanisms that are allowing people to go home in New York State. We have what we call the 440-20, which allow you to challenge your sentence, legal sentences. And then they came up recently, just passed the law, the 440-47, and they call it the domestic something act. And so a lot of people are going back to court under this 440-47, saying that, y'all heard the term ACE, right? That's adverse childhood experiences. Well, they saying based on their adverse childhood experiences, that all the stuff they went through, the trauma and all they went through, contributed to their criminal lifestyle, whatever. And so what the courts have been doing recently is they're allowing these motions to go into court, and then they're converting them to 440.20s and saying that we're going to reduce your sentence in the instance of justice. And that's how they're getting around letting people go home. But that's just New York State. Some of the other stuff I'll talk about more later on. That's it all.
In Pennsylvania, they just started back the commutation, allowing people to go in front of the commutation board. But we found that in commutation, it's like hit or miss. They will deny you, you don't know why. They basically retry you, like they always go back to whatever you did to get into prison, and it just seem like you're being retried. And if you're being retried, you're gonna be found guilty again. And you have to admit, even if you're innocent, to go to commutation, you have to admit that you're guilty when you may not be guilty, and you don't want to admit that. But if you go in front of the commutation board, you have to admit that you're guilty. The other thing about the parole board, the commutation board also, they don't have to tell you why they said they denied you. They don't tell you why, so you don't know why. You can't go back and prepare yourself. Also with the commutation board, the victim can have a statement or come and testify and just throw the whole thing off. Where we had people who came up there and they've been like perfect from day one. And the victim came up and said something. We had one case where the victims came up and actually lied. They were young children when it happened, and they actually lied, and the person was denied commutation, and they had to go back and look at the records to see that this was never in court, all these things that they said. Anyway, this person was denied. So it's a hit or miss. With the parole board, you go in front of the parole board, you're interviewed, but if they don't, we don't even know why they deny you. My son went in front of the parole board. He was resentenced to parole, and he went in front of the parole board 3 times before they would let him out. At one point, the parole board lied and said that they were denying his parole because he had been on parole before. He had been on parole before and violated his parole. He had life in prison. He'd never been on parole to violate anything, so that was totally crazy. But anyway, after the 3rd time, he was finally given parole. Was one other thing. Also, with the life sentences, we consider life sentence no matter what is number of years. It could be, years on top of years and divide years. That's life sentence. Like they said, beyond your expectancy of life. With my son, they gave him life in prison plus 10 years. So you get life in prison plus you get an extra 10 years. So that's kind of where we stay. I think Salim can talk on it a little better.
No, just in Pennsylvania, all life sentences are life without parole for 1st and 2nd degree murder. And that number is close to 5,500 right now. And if you're applying for commutation, you have to get unanimous vote from the Board of Pardons, which is 5 votes. And that's really contributed to so few applicants actually getting commutation. I think at the rate that the commutation board is going now, I think a couple of years ago someone did the math. It would probably take like 120 years for all lifers in Pennsylvania to come up for commutation and be released, because it's that many, and they're releasing less than 19 a year. Now that's a step up, because from 1994 to 2019, I think only 1 person received commutation. Might have been like 2 or 3, but it was really low. It was only from pressure from Amistad Law Project, Abolitionist Law Center, CADB, Human Rights Coalition, that number started to rise to its highest point was 19 in 1 year. So those are the challenges that we're facing in Pennsylvania. That's why we're trying to win parole eligibility through bills that we have in the state legislature for 1st and 2nd degree murder, but also for geriatric parole for people who have those terminal sentences as well. We're also advocating for parole as the viable means to decarcerate, to get people home, because that's how I would have never made it out through commutation because of my prison record, right? So parole for us is the means that we got to bring people home, and in order for us to do that, we have to convince a very conservative legislature to pass legislation to bring home 5,500 lifers. So that's our challenge in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
Thank you so much, panel, for speaking of this, we have time for maybe like one question. Okay.